Welcome to the War of 1812, Knowledge 5. We are on lesson number 5, the attack on Washington, D.C. Before we hear about the attack on the Washington, D.C., let's go through our vocab words for today. I will read the word, you repeat it after me. Represent, patience, magnificent, economy. So if I was going to the store, what would I be contributing to? What part of our government will I be contributing to? The economy. If I saw something very beautiful like the Grand Canyon, what word could I use to describe it? Again, as a review, the British had a three-part plan. They were going to attack from Canada, then move into New York and attack our cities, and then they were going to attack the New Orleans and take control of the Mississippi River. The United States had knowledge of the waterways, remember, and they could sneak around the British blockades. And then in the early parts of the 1812, the United States had some victories, but the British were doing pretty good. And now they didn't have to fight France anymore, so they could give our full attention on us. After today's read aloud, you should be able to identify the main topic of the attack on Washington, D.C., and show an understanding of the word quench. After they helped Grandfather Lafitte get fresh water for the horses, JP and Adele led them out into the pasture. Then the children hurried back to the barn and perched themselves on some bales of hay while Grandfather oiled his favorite saddle. Now, are you going to tell us about what happened next? Adele said. I sure am, said Grandfather as he responded. If you remember, the British had a three-part plan. Well, attacking Washington, D.C. was next. The British believed capturing the capital city would make the United States think hard about surrendering. They put their plan into action in the summer of 1814. They sent an army, about 4,000 men, to the capital. Remember, that was how big the entire U.S. Army was. The British Army was ready to fight. Washington, D.C. was still a new town at that time. The streets were not paved, and lots of building was taking place. If the streets were not paved, what do you think they looked like? Yeah, they were dirt roads. But the U.S. Congress met there to make laws. The Supreme Court met there, and of course the president and his wife lived there. Now we know from records that August 1814 was especially hot. The people of Washington, D.C. were struggling to cope with the heat when they heard that the British had landed an army near their city. At the time, there were about 8,000 people living in the new capital. What did the president do? Said JP. The president knew that he had to be with his soldiers as they faced the British Army. He told Mrs. Madison to stay in the president's house. He asked some soldiers to stay with her and to keep her safe. Then he rode off to be with his army. Why do you think the president rode off to join his army? This reminds me of Alexander the Great when he would ride off with his army and ride ahead. What a good leader. Where did he go? Asked Adele. There was a battle fought in Maryland, just a few miles from the city. The British beat the U.S. Army pretty quickly and then marched on to Washington, D.C. Many of the people in the city left when they heard that their army had been defeated and that the British were coming. The dirt roads were jammed with people trying to escape, as well as carts piled high with their possessions. I think I would have been scared, said Adele. Yes, war can be scary, and we are proud of the soldiers who fought to protect our country back then, just as we are proud of the military today, who work hard to keep us safe. What happened to Mrs. Madison? JP asked. Excellent question. Mrs. Madison had waited to see what would happen. When she realized that the British were on their way, she got ready to leave. She wanted to try to save some of her things, but she did not know what to bring with her. The president's house contained so many beautiful and valuable items, but she knew she could not take everything. In the end, Dolly Madison saved some important papers and letters that she knew her husband would want. At the last minute, a painting of George Washington was also saved. With the British Army so close, they did not have time to carefully remove the canvas from the frame. So a canvas is a special type of cloth artists use to paint on. So the painting was on a canvas. Instead, the painting and the frame were taken off the wall. Dolly Madison and others in the president's house made it out of the house just in the nick of time, and George Washington was saved. Here's a picture of that George Washington painting, and it is still hung in still in the White House today. So thanks to Dolly Madison that she saved that painting. What happened when the British soldiers got there? Asked JP. The British broke down the doors and rushed inside. It seemed Mrs. Madison had set the table for Mr. Madison and his men. Some of the British soldiers later described finding a large table in the dining room set for 40 guests. They described the crystal glasses, shimmering silverware, and delicate china. In the kitchen, meat had been roasting on the fire, and pots and pans had been placed upon the grates. It was clear that the residents of the house had left in a hurry. Some of the British soldiers sat down at the dinner table and enjoyed a tasty meal. For some of these men, it was the first home-cooked meal they had eaten in quite some time. When they were done, they ransacked the house. Ransack means to look for something and cause a big mess or disease. They stole anything they could carry away, and then, before they left, they set fire to the president's house. As the flames burned around them, the British marched out of the city. So you can see now, a couple of years after the war started, they burned down the White House and other buildings. Everything ruined? Said Adele. Many buildings were, explained Grandfather Lafitte. When the British Army reached the capital, they destroyed all the public buildings. Many of them had been just built. The President's house, the Senate House, as well as some important dockyard areas and storehouses and much more. But, as luck would have it, rain clouds gathered and a big storm moved in. The rain and wind helped quench the flames. Quench means to put something out or reduce. Several days later, when the Madisons returned, they found their home still standing, but had been badly damaged. The fire had blackened the walls, many of the windows were broken, and most of their possessions were gone. They were sad. That is sad, said Adele. Well, my next story will cheer you up, said Grandfather joyfully. The British got more than they bargained for when they tried to do the same thing in Baltimore. What was the main topic of this read aloud? Yeah, the main topic of this read aloud was the attack on Washington, D.C., the British attacking us. Our word work word for today is the word quench. I will say the word, you repeat it after me. Quench. Quench means to put something out or to lessen or reduce it. The runner drank water after the race to quench her thirst. How do you like to quench your thirst? And I'll put up all these choices. You're going to tell me if that could quench my thirst or that could not. A drink of water. A glass of orange juice. A hamburger. A glass of milk. A banana. A cup of lemonade. A popsicle. Peanut butter. Spaghetti, and an ice cube. Again, we're going to hear about, finally, hopefully there's some positive things going on with the War of 1812, and we will hear some positive things as we talk about the Battle of Baltimore.